Hi, a very good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this webinar today. My name is Zhihan, a research assistant at SSR. Today, we are pleased to invite the research team from Fei Yue Community Services and NUS Next Age Institute, comprising Wei Lun, Ivana, Clarissa, and Prof. Tang. They will share their study on the caregiving experiences of male caregivers of persons with dementia. We also have Dr. Liu Taoming, Clinical Associate Professor at the Duke NUS Medical School and Senior Consultant at SGH, moderate this session. Before we begin, I'll first make a few announcements. So we are streaming this webinar on Zoom and recording this session live on our SSR Facebook page. So by participating in this Zoom webinar, you consent to this recording and for SSR to use it for publicity. The presenters have kindly agreed to share their slides, and thus this will be circulated in a follow-up email to everyone who have registered for this webinar after this webinar ends. So for question and answers, you may post and vote for questions via our Pigeonhole link on the screen. When the Q&A session is open to the floor later, you may also use the raise hand function on Zoom if you wish to turn on your mic and on your camera to ask your question directly. Please ask your question only after being called by the moderator. We will not be taking questions from the Zoom chat and the Facebook comments section. And as we have a limited amount of time for Q&A, we apologize if we are unable to address all questions. So registration for upcoming participatory research for social services workshop is closing soon. This workshop will be conducted by Dr. Hana Al-Haddad, who has been running this workshop several times. And this workshop will be especially useful if you wish to learn how to engage and empower community members or service users in your research. If you are keen to attend this workshop, please register by the 23rd of April. With that, I will now pass my time over to Prof. Tang. Thank you.
Hello, thank you so much, Zhihan. Let me see, I cannot see myself here. Okay, yeah. Yes, so our talk today is titled Men Do Care, Experiences of Male Caregivers of Persons with Dementia. And this is a study that was done jointly by Fei Yue Community Services and the Next Age Institute at NUS. So I'm representing more the NAI side with my colleagues, Ni Chun and Jiang Nan. And also for this talk, we have Clarissa from the CREST team in Fei Yue Community Services to join us in the discussion because we really want to look into practice aspect as well, knowing that many of you are coming from social service and public health sector. So I'll be just giving the introduction and then followed by Wei Lun, who will lead us into the findings. So yeah, so there's the background research objectives that I will be talking about. And then Wei Lun, Ivana, and Clarissa will be doing the findings and discussions followed by the Q&A session. So we ask for your, if you have any questions, you can always put on the chat, or you can wait till the Q&A session to ask as well. Okay, before we begin, I'd really like to thank our partners in the field for really helping us because to interview people was to get the interviewees was actually a lot more difficult than we thought, especially during COVID period. So we managed to, we actually wanted more interviewees, but we managed to get 30 at the end of male caregivers. And we are also thankful for the Care and Share matching grant that made this research possible. Okay, let me quickly move down to the background. I think most of you must be familiar with background. Why do we want to study male caregivers? When we think about caregivers of older persons, it's very common for us to have an image of caregivers as women. And in the past, it was more of the image of daughter-in-law or daughters, while recently we do also see more of spousal caregivers. And some of you may know that I do research on Japan. In my research on older Japanese, when older men were asked who will care for them, they will matter-of-factly will say, my wife. But when you ask the wife will never say it's my husband, they will say probably I will enter a nursing home, because in Japan, it's also older people also trying not to burden their children in a sense in care. So such a gendered perception of caregivers have resulted in underrepresentation of men in the caregiving literature, although in reality, male are increasingly playing the caregiver role as well for their spouses and for their parents. So rapidly aging population is certainly one reason where there will be a need for more caregivers for older persons. We are all well aware that in Singapore, by 2030, 1 in 4 age 65 and above will be age 65 and above, unless there is a drastic change in health span. The average of difference between health and lifespan is about 10 years, which means that with more older persons in the population, there will be more caregiving needs. And also, higher proportion of women are affected by dementia compared with men. In the US, for example, 2/3 of the 6.2 million of older people with Alzheimer's disease are women. Age is the greatest risk factor for dementia, and tendency for women to live longer also means a higher tendency for them to live with dementia. Also, the changes in gender role expectation here means that women, especially daughter-in-laws, are no longer expected to play the role of caregivers of their parents-in-law. I also noticed, like, for example, in China, because of this single child family, it seems to be an increasing norm for each couple to care for their own parents respectively. That means the wife will be only caring for her own parents, whereas the husband is expected to care for his own parents. In this regard, then we are also expecting more caregivers, sons as caregivers as well in China. So changes in family structure in terms of more likelihood for older couples to live on their own, away from the children, would also mean that the husband will inevitably be caring for their wife on their own. And this can be quite isolating. For example, in Japan, we do hear social issues such as older husbands who are caregivers killing the demented wife out of despair. Furthermore, increase in singlehood of adult children remaining single also means that single sons could become caregivers for their parents, besides this typical image of single daughters. So what are some of the support caregivers can receive in Singapore as we ride on such a social demographic change? Here, I think you all must be quite familiar, perhaps with CREST, the system that supports clients aged 18 years and above at risk of or diagnosed with mental health conditions, as well as to support their caregivers. I think until a while ago, it was more of services only for those who are 40 years and above, and more recently, the clients that CREST support also include 18 years and above. But as Fei Yue service team has experienced, most of their clients are, of course, from the older population. So CREST is short for Community Resource Engagement and Support Team, if you're not familiar. Then there are also a variety of elder care services, such as the CCMS, the Community Case Management Support Service, home care services, caregiver support respite services that we can, caregivers can tap on. But as we will discuss later, there are always the gap being perceived and experienced by the caregivers as well. Okay, so this is just to show you that, well, on Fei Yue now has 7 CREST teams. We started with 3 CREST teams in 2018. So by now we are serving about 1,400 clients, and consistently we see a proportion of male caregivers at around 30 to 35%. Okay. Next. Yeah, so this is just a list of tables to show that locally what kind of research for male caregivers have we seen in the research. So here we see that most of the, when we look at qualitative studies, most of them do have some numbers of male participants, but not much. For number 10, the one that is with a huge total sample, we can see this one is from CARE at NUS. You can download the report directly from their website online, but they have actually managed to survey quite a big number of 74 caregivers. Okay, so we do look at all this research to see how our study findings do dovetail or parallel with their studies as well. Okay, so the research objectives that we have for this study is really to understand the caregiving experiences of male caregivers for persons with dementia. We like to look at the transition to caregiving, the kind of challenges they face and how they are coping with it, and also the growth that in this whole process of this caregiving journey, and what kind of support they have access to, and what are their comments and responses and experience of this support that they have been receiving. So let me pass on to Waylon, who will start the section on findings and discussion.
Thank you, Prof. Tang. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for your time. I'm Wei Lun from Fei Yue Community Services. I also want to add that we have actually also invited our interviewees to this webinar. So I think we really hope that some of them can be here with us today. So for the next few minutes, I will just briefly share about our research before we go into the findings. Ours is a qualitative study where we interviewed 30 men who were caregivers. We also conducted a focus group discussion with our community mental health practitioner colleagues who were involved in supporting seniors with dementia and their caregivers. Just give me a minute, my slides are not changing. Okay, it has changed. All right, so a little bit about our participants. 10 of them were husbands of the persons with dementia, 18 were sons, and for the remaining 2, one was a good friend, and another was actually caring for both his mother-in-law and sister-in-law. So he was both a son-in-law and a brother-in-law. Here you can see their age, ethnicity, and living arrangement. Most of them were Chinese, and 5 of them were not living with the person whom they were caring for. As for the length of caregiving, it ranged from 4 months to 20 years. And the hours of caregiving per week could be as short as 5 hours or as long as 168 hours, which actually means 24/7. In terms of caregiving support, at the point of interview, all of them have some access to some form of caregiving support or community care services. And at the point of interview, 17 had domestic helpers. As for the care recipients, there were 26 females and 5 males. There were a total of 31 care recipients because, as we mentioned earlier, one of them was actually caring for 2 care recipients. In terms of the dementia, 5 of the care recipients had mild dementia, 13 had severe dementia, and the rest were either mild to moderate or moderate dementia. Right. Next, we are going to present our findings, and I'm really glad to have Clarissa here with us because, as Prof. Tang has mentioned, Clarissa is our CREST colleague who has been working with seniors with dementia and their caregivers. So today she will comment on our findings from a practice perspective, and I'm sure it will really greatly enrich our discussion. So because of time, we are not able to share all our findings. So we have selected 3 topics to share: do men care differently? the caregiving journey and growing through caregiving. So if you would like to know more, please feel free to get in touch with us. For each of these topics, we are going to share a little bit differently. So usually for qualitative study, we will just share the findings thematically. So we'll share the themes. But today we are going to do things a little bit differently. So for each topic, Ivana, Carissa, and myself, we are going to have a conversation. We will have Ivana to start the ball rolling to share with us our findings, and then I will attempt to discuss the findings in light of existing literature, and Carissa will comment on the findings as a practitioner. We hope by putting together our findings with existing literature and also practice, we can get a more holistic understanding of this issue. So we also hope that you will find our presentation refreshing and useful. So without further ado, let's look at the first topic. Do men care differently? I'll pass on to Ivana to share with us our finding regarding anything unique about men providing care. Ivana.
Thanks, Wei Lun. So from our study, we found that participants tend to focus on instrumental tasks related to caregiving, such as medical appointments and medication needs of the persons with dementia that they were caring for. And I remember that one of them even shared with us his weekly timetable plan for caregiving in this little notebook. Yeah, so they also seek out information about dementia and caregiving through healthcare professionals, attending caregivers training, or the internet. That said, some of the participants adopted a more personal relational approach in terms of caregiving. And this group tend to be male caregivers who shared a close relationship with the person with dementia prior to their diagnosis. So they approach caregiving in a more personal way and considered person with dementia's preferences in their decision making. So for example, one of our participants shared that he did not hire a helper to support caregiving as his mother might not be accepting of strangers. Another finding was that the process of caregiving often involved more than just one caregiver. So there was often this division of labor between our participant, who is the male caregiver, and other caregivers who can either be other family members like siblings, adult children, or foreign domestic workers or helpers. And for participants with helpers, ADL issues such as eating, dressing, showering tend to be outsourced to helpers, while they take on a more decision-making supervisory role in caregiving. One of the reasons for outsourcing of ADLs can also be due to the gender difference between the caregiver and care recipient, who were mostly females.
Yeah, Ivana, so what you just mentioned ties in with a concept that we came across during when we were scanning the literature. It is called the masculinization of caregiving. So what is this masculinization of caregiving? It's a mouthful. It basically means it's the idea that men co-opt ideals of masculinity into their caregiving. So what it means is that traditionally, caregiving is being seen as more a feminine role. So when men becomes caregiver, they will sort of construct the caregiving as men's work. So they co-opt some ideals of masculinity into the caregiving. So for example, they will want to take control of the situation. They tend to be more task-oriented, like what you have mentioned, and to adopt a more problem-solving kind of approach. And also they will say things like, okay, caregiving is really a tough job. So they wanted to be seen as tough, as in not revealing their weaknesses or vulnerability. So for example, in one of the studies, some of the men who were interviewed, they described their caregiving as the caregiving approach as rational and task focused. And then they described their role as being a manager or being an organizer. So I thought this is an interesting concept that can help us make sense of our data. So over to you, Carissa. From a practice perspective, do you think we need to sort of work with male caregivers differently?
Thanks for the question, Wei Long, and also to Ivana for the very insightful findings. I think it was actually quite interesting to see the same differences in some of my own clients on the ground. Although I have to say a vast majority of the caregivers shared very similar concerns regardless of their gender. So that said, to answer your question, Wei Long, I think the general approach to working with male caregivers don't really differentiate that much from working with female caregivers as we address the broad issues that all of them face. And as a CRES worker, I think one way that we can support all caregivers will be by providing emotional support, by addressing practical concerns and also promoting self-care. So actually caring for a loved one, as you all know, can be quite emotionally draining, and it's very important to have a support system in place for them to manage the stress and also to engage in self-care to prevent burnout. Practical concerns like financial and legal issues, they are also quite common among the caregivers. And as care workers, what we can do is to provide guidance and also resources that can alleviate some of these concerns. And of course, while addressing all these broad issues, we must also keep in mind the unique challenges that male caregivers face, as shared by Wei Lu and Ivana. So I think one thing that we can do is to be more intentional in addressing any gender-based stereotype, and also to normalize the presence of male caregivers within the community. And we can also consider providing specialized trainings and support groups to provide male caregivers with a safe space to connect with others who may be facing similar challenges. And actually on the ground, we do encounter male caregivers who are interested in attending male caregiver support groups so that they are more comfortable with sharing their emotions with the other caregivers. But there aren't many of such support groups at present, maybe due to the fact that the demand for these support groups are not yet explored, which is something that we can also consider to look more into moving forward.
Thanks, Clarissa. Can I just have a follow-up question, Clarissa? So when you provide emotional support to male caregivers, how is their response?
I think the response really boils down to individual personalities as well as their own comfort levels in sharing their emotions. So on one hand, we do have male caregivers who are very, very forthcoming with sharing their struggles with us, and sometimes even taking the initiative to reach out whenever they need emotional support. On the other hand, we also have male caregivers who are very hesitant or reluctant to open up emotionally. And I usually experience this more commonly with the older male caregivers.
I see. Thanks, Clarissa. So some are more open to receiving emotional support, and maybe the older caregivers may not be that open. So thanks, Clarissa. Next, we will look at how they transit into caregiving, and then I'll hand over to Ivana to talk us through this journey. Ivana?
Thanks, Clarissa and Wei Lun. So those are really helpful pointers. I think caregiving journey can indeed look very different among caregivers, and it's important that we understand their preferences. So that said, we found that there were some commonalities in terms of transition into caregiving among our participants. We have loosely categorized them into 3 phases, which are awareness, adjustment, and adaptation. So awareness phase basically refers to the time period during which the dementia diagnosis occurs, while adjustment refers to the time period after diagnosis and how they cater to caregiving tasks and duties. And lastly, the adaptation refers to how the caregivers finally settle into the caregiver role. So of course, we recognize that in reality, the transition into caregiving may not be so linear and sequential, but what we would like to highlight here is that during the time leading up to the diagnosis, the participants' lack of awareness of early signs of dementia often left the dementia onset undetected, and it was often only until certain behavioral abnormalities arise. So for example, some participants mentioned about excessive sleeping or incoherent speech, or even drastic memory decline and confusion that they kind of started to notice, and this finally led to formal assessment and diagnosis of dementia. So Wei Lun, I wonder if there is anything about the caregiving journey in the literature.
Yes, there are two studies that actually also mapped out the journey or the different transitions in this journey. So the first one is a local qualitative study. Based on the data, the researchers actually mapped out 3 transitions. The first is called crossing the threshold to become a caregiver. So this is when the participants first became a caregiver. Then they transit into a trudging phase where they encounter the ups and downs of caregiving. So it is a time of adjusting to all the changes and challenges that come with caregiving. Finally, they transit into a more settled period where they have adapted to their roles as caregivers. So in this phase, there are new routines and new normalcy. In this study, there were more female than male participants, but as you can see, our finding is consistent with what they found, except that maybe they phrase it better than ours. Yeah, so the second study studied only male caregivers, the second one, and it approached the journey from a more identity formation kind of angle. It looked at how the male caregivers construct their caregiving identity. Initially, in the me and it kind of phase, the participants separated their caregiving duties from their sense of self. Then the two aspects move closer in the second me despite it phase. And finally, they move into it is me phase, where caregiving became part of their identity. So it seems that there is also this process of encountering something new, and then the process of getting used to it or adopting a new identity. But Ivana, just now you mentioned the early signs of dementia usually went undetected, and that one was also consistent with a previous study. In this first study that you see on this slide, the authors actually published another paper that reported quite a similar pattern. So in the 1 or 2 years prior to the formal diagnosis, the person with dementia were already showing some signs, but the family members were uncertain whether it was just normal aging or something more serious. So it was when the conditions became more severe that they brought their loved ones for an assessment, which then led to diagnosis. So in a way, they missed out that window when the dementia can perhaps be detected earlier. So on this note, I just want to turn this over to Clarissa. Regarding this, what do you think we can do, or are we already doing something to raise awareness at an earlier stage?
Thanks, Wei Lu. Yeah, I think actually what you mentioned earlier about differentiating between normal age-related memory loss and also the early onset of dementia is actually a challenge that many caregivers we work with have also mentioned. And this brings about my first point on knowing. Many social service agencies out there, they are already educating the public on dementia so that they know the signs and symptoms to look out for and how to go about seeking further help if they spot these symptoms. So actually, Fei Yue Crest has been working with many community partners like community clubs, senior activity centers, corporate organizations, or even schools to provide psychoeducation on dementia. And during our talks, we emphasize that dementia is actually not a normal part of aging, and how we can differentiate between these two will be the frequency of forgetfulness, the extent to which it disrupts their daily life, and also any changes of personality which may be indicative of the onset of dementia. And of course, beyond just knowing about dementia, we also encourage active monitoring, be it through just observation or regular checkups at their usual polyclinics or GPs who are certified to provide mental health assessments and diagnosis. So actually, based on the interactions with my own clients, I actually find that the seniors who attend regular appointments are generally more likely to seek early intervention, as all these checkups provide an avenue for them or their loved ones to voice the concerns about any cognitive issues. And actually, Crest services are also able to take on a monitoring role through check-ins with the clients and the use of basic screening tools. And lastly would be acting. So we know that knowing and monitoring would enable one to act early when they first display any concerning cognitive symptoms. We all know that there's no cure to dementia at present, but early treatment and management might help to maintain or even slow down the deterioration. And that's why we always encourage the caregivers to take action early so that they can receive the necessary support that they need. And oftentimes, individuals exhibiting all these symptoms of dementia may feel anxious. They may feel hesitant to seek help. And this will make it difficult for their loved ones to also broach the subject of memory loss and potential dementia. So I think it's also very important for the people around them to approach this topic with empathy and compassion to foster a more supportive environment for the conversation as well.
Thanks, Clarissa. Yeah, I think early awareness of what is dementia can also help to inform caregivers of the road ahead, given the impact and intensity of caregiving. So in our study, participants shared that every aspect of caregiving basically requires time, effort, and money. And for some participants, caregiving is a 24/7 responsibility that consumes virtually all their time and energy. It impacted on them physically, mentally, socially, and financially. So for example, some of them mentioned about how certain behavioral abnormalities, they were particularly prevalent at night when person with dementia would wake up or walk around the house in confusion, affecting the participants' physical rest and subsequently their work performance. And the findings regarding how caregiving impacted the participants socially were actually quite nuanced. So some participants shared that they were not able to go out in peace anymore because of caregiving. And one participant whose wife was bedridden mentioned that he had to tend to his wife round the clock. And because he did not have a domestic helper and his children did not live with them, so he could only go downstairs to buy things when his wife was asleep, but had to make sure that he returned home quickly because his wife will look for him once she wakes up. So for some participants, there were also like issues like even when they are out with friends, they would still worry about what is happening at home. While others talk about like how when they are with family and friends, they did not really share their thoughts and experiences with anyone, as their family and friends might not understand what they were going through. So they shared that this caregiving journey may be quite emotionally isolating, as they were going through it alone, even though they were not socially isolated or anything. So all this affected their mental health. And we also have older participants who were retired and had helpers at home, but chose to stay at home to look after things because they would be worrying even though they have time to go out, but they won't really go out. So going out did not seem to be a priority. So in terms of implication on practice, we may need to consider these individual differences when we try to strengthen their social support. And since we are talking about gender in this seminar, there were also challenges with regards to male caregivers caring after a female person with dementia, such as sons having to shower their mothers. So let us now look at some quotes from our interviews, illustrating the impact of caregiving on our participants. Okay, so here are more quotes from our interviews. I'll just pause for a while to let you all read through. So actually looking back at our project, each interview was quite time consuming and it took around like 1 hour to 1.5 hours. So there could also have been some selection bias. Caregivers who might be so overwhelmed with caregiving might not have the time to participate in our interviews. In fact, I recall one of our participants sharing with us that the ability to even talk to us was a quote unquote luxury, and it was only because he was blessed with a very good helper.
Thanks, Ivana. So how did our participants cope with the impact of caregiving?
So in our study, religious faith, physical exercises such as cycling, badminton, as well as other hobbies like singing, art, and painting were cited by participants as their ways to cope with some of the caregiving burdens and stress. Cognitively, they also adopted a flexible mindset to accept their situations and deal with the highly unpredictable and progressive nature of dementia. This was reflected in the terms that they used when we asked them about what are their future plans with regards to caregiving. So some examples include, they said that they are taking it one step at a time, just managing time, and they will cross the bridge when it comes. And if finances allow, most participants will hire helpers to manage the physical aspects of caregiving. So that seemed to be a kind of problem-focused coping. And in terms of access to caregiver support group and training, participants who have been through these trainings and support groups shared that they had quite limited engagement with the services, as the engagement usually did not go beyond the duration of the course of the caregivers training. And specifically, participants also expressed a preference for informational and skills-based support. So for instance, I recall one of the spouse caregiver that we interviewed actually shared that the 24/7 hotline provided by a particular hospice was really helpful when he encountered like bed sore issues for the first time and did not know who or where to seek help from. So if not for the hotline, he would have needed to bring his wife to the hospital emergency department. Yeah, so some participants also appreciated the practical tips and resources from other caregivers during the caregivers training in terms of social, emotional, and informational support. So like knowing about certain resources, for example, one participant shared about this thing called the geriatric or the Geri chairs, because someone was sharing about it during the caregivers training or support group. So yeah, Wei Lun, were these findings more similar or different from what was reported in the literature?
Yes, so far we know that caregiving takes a toll on almost all aspects of a caregiver's life, the physical, psychological, emotional, social, financial, etc. And based on our literature, some common ways of coping are social engagement, religion, seeking out resources and services, self-care, etc. However, when we break it down further into men and women, we do see some differences. So women tend to report higher level of distress. They have more social support and they seek social and emotional support more. Whereas for men, they tend to report less distress. But I must add this, that most researchers explain this as the socialization of men to be more tough, and therefore they were less likely to want to appear vulnerable, and therefore they will tend to underreport their experience of stress or distress. So this ties in with an earlier point about masculinization of the caregiving role. Next, men tend to have smaller social circles. So as caregiving slowly chips away their time, they have lesser time for socialization, and then they become socially isolated more rapidly. And as mentioned earlier, men adopt a more problem-focused coping style. And also there's this interpretation that the reason why they are so problem-focused, so task-oriented is their coping strategy is a way for them to block out emotions and just to get themselves preoccupied with the task at hand, right? And also they tend to have a lower utility of support groups and services. And like what you mentioned, they prefer more informational and skill-based support. So I think some of our findings do echo the findings of previous research. So Clarissa, just now you already mentioned some of the things that CRESS has been doing when working with caregivers and supporting them. Are there anything else that we can do to sort of support them in terms of the impact of caregiving?
Yeah, thanks, Wei Lun. Yeah, I think earlier I mentioned some of the ways that CRESS has been working with caregivers. So that includes emotional support, addressing practical concerns through service linkaging, and also self-care. And with regards to offering support, I think what you mentioned earlier, Wei Lun, about male caregivers feeling lonely in their journey, even though they technically were not alone and had people around them. That's really such a real experience that really exemplifies the importance of the support rendered not only by social workers, but also that of their friends and family. Actually, friends and family can, offer a listening ear, educate themselves on dementia and its caregiving challenges, and offer practical help like running errands to support the caregiver. After all, it's very likely that these people are the ones that they interact with more on a day-to-day basis, and support from all these people will make a huge difference. And next, when we talk about self-care, caregivers may sometimes put their own well-being last, which can lead to health issues and burnout over time. So we always encourage caregivers to prioritize their own self-care, but many caregivers often respond with, "Where got time?" But actually self-care doesn't have to be time-consuming or complicated. I actually know of a client whose form of self-care is cycling to the nearby market to do their grocery shopping in the morning. So it can be as simple as that. And self-care can also take the form of relaxation activities like mindfulness, spending time with their friends, or simply doing things that they love. And on top of that, we can help caregivers cope by assisting them with planning ahead. So what we can do is provide information on care arrangement options, for example, dementia daycares, for them to put together a care plan that suits the needs of their loved ones. And we can also encourage them to look into planning their finances, legal matters, and also their loved one's end-of-life preferences and look into putting up, for example, a advanced care plan or lasting power of attorney. By planning ahead, we can help caregivers to feel more in control and more prepared for the challenges that they might face ahead. And last would be reintegration. I think it's also very important to recognize that the journey of a caregiver doesn't end with the passing of their loved one. Upon their loved one's passing, many caregivers experience a huge range of emotions. It can be sadness, guilt, relief, or anger. And grief and loss is not a linear process, and there's actually no right or wrong way to grieve. So what we can do to support them is to support them through their individual grieving processes while they find healing and move forward in their journey. And sometimes they also experience this sense of emptiness upon their loved one's passing. So previously, maybe their daily routines might have always been revolving around the day-to-day caregiving duties. And the role of a caregiver has become a very significant part of their own identity. So by providing bereavement support and counseling, we can also help caregivers rebuild their self-identity and help them rediscover their purpose in life, aside from that of caregiving.
I really agree with what you shared, Clarissa. Grief is indeed a non-linear process. It reminded me of one participant we invited who chose not to attend today's seminar as his wife passed on a few months after our interview. So he tries to avoid anything that will remind him of her. So yeah, more time and resources can indeed be focused in supporting and reintegrating these ex-caregivers. And with regards to the point on long-term planning, from our study, long-term planning did not seem to be our participants' priorities. So this might be due to two reasons. Firstly, it might be their preoccupation with the day-to-day caregiving. And it reminds me of a quote that I heard from, I think, SSR conference recently, how to plan for rainy days when you are living in a storm. And secondly, it might be due to the lack of options when we talk about long-term planning. The hefty cost of nursing homes was an issue, and hiring helpers may come with its own set of problems as well, including compatibility and dynamics with the person with dementia.
Yeah, what you mentioned about long-term planning is quite consistent with our what we find in literature. That is, when it comes to long-term planning, a lot of these participants, they were uncertain about what to do. They also adopt a take one step at a time kind of stance. So as Clarissa mentioned, future planning may be an area that we need to really look into. And next, as our study was done during the COVID-19 period, so we also asked them how COVID-19 has impacted their caregiving. This article basically shows that during the circuit breaker, when everyone had to stay at home and community services like daycares, drop-in centers were shut down, it was really a very difficult time for the caregivers. So Ivana will now tell us more about how COVID-19 impacted our participants' caregiving.
Okay, yeah. So firstly, some of the COVID-19 response measures directly impacted on the person with dementia and their caregivers. So as you mentioned, due to the closures of centers such as retiree center, dementia daycare centers. And during circuit breaker, there were also concerns about persons with dementia leaving the house on their own. And some participants shared with us about, various tricks that they use to keep the person with dementia at home. And our participants also shared observations and concerns about the limited social interactions due to the long duration of staying at home that might have led to rapid deterioration of their loved one's condition. And in terms of the work from home arrangements, there were mixed impact as some of participants were glad that they were able to look after the person with dementia at home while they work. But on the other hand, there were also observations that the person with dementia's dependence tend to increase now that they know the caregiver is around all the time. So in the next slide, we will look at some of these interview quotes illustrating these points. Yeah, so just like how COVID-19 has impacted all of us differently, there were mixed impact on our participants as well. So Wei Lun, were there any literature about the impact of COVID-19 that you came across?
Yes, there is this one local study, qualitative study that looked at COVID-19's impact on caregiving. And as you can see from the teams, the situation seems quite grim for caregivers. I just want to add that this study had more female participants than male participants. And in another study that interviewed an all-female kind of sample, participants reported that caregiving resulted in them having to multitask or to take on multiple roles, as opposed to what we saw just now about male caregivers who will delegate out the roles if they can. So my guess is that if they were already multitasking before COVID-19, then COVID-19 will probably have aggravated the situation, which might explain this finding. Clarissa, how did COVID-19 impact our service? I mean, what adjustment did we have to make?
Yeah, I think looking back, actually COVID-19 really brought about a very unique set of challenges for everyone, be it the clients, the caregivers, or even the services working in the elderly. And as Ivana mentioned, elder care services had to be put on hold during the pandemic, and that left a lot of caregivers without their usual support network, and also increased the burden of caregiving at home. So to address this, CRES had to adapt accordingly. Home visits were replaced by video calls and phone calls as we tried our best to check in with the clients and the caregivers via virtual support. And of course, it was an uphill task, given most of the seniors' unfamiliarity with the technology and also the devices. So actually, I had a client that tried showing me an item on a video call, but actually during the whole time, they were using the front-facing camera, so I could see their face. But one takeaway of this whole COVID-19 and also the use of technology is that caregivers had acquired a skill of using technology to remain connected to their support systems. And now, even after COVID, they are still able to keep in touch with their friends and families, even if they are staying on the opposite ends of Singapore or they are staying overseas. And next, we also continue to connect caregivers to resources within the community relevant to any existing or new needs that might have arose during the pandemic. So for example, for homebound clients with dementia that had yet to undergo the COVID vaccination, we were able to link them up with the mobile vaccination teams for the ease of both the clients and the caregivers. And lastly, in order to ensure that the clients are continually engaged, we also suggested some home-based activities to keep the clients' mind stimulated during especially the circuit breaker time. And these activities range from physical activities like chair yoga, cognitive activities like puzzles, crosswords, sensory activities like painting or listening to music to promote relaxation, as well as reminiscence activities such as looking through old photo albums or videos for clients to really connect with their past and reminisce on happy memories.
Thanks, Clarissa. Just wanted to share with you, many of our participants actually expressed their appreciation of the efforts and support provided by community agencies during COVID-19. So it includes like all the phone calls, video calls to keep in touch and activities via Zoom. And they were also understanding that there were really very limited things that agencies like us could do besides conducting activities through Zoom, particularly during the circuit breaker period. Yeah, so finally, we want to end off on a positive note. So during our interviews, we asked our participants if there was any positive aspect of caregiving. Yeah, so I have to first acknowledge that this question was rather challenging to answer for a number of our participants, as they did not think there was anything positive about caregiving and wish their loved ones had not gotten dementia in the first place. But for those who answered, their sharings could be broadly categorized into these three aspects. So in terms of personal growth, participants reported having more patience and empathy, personal autonomy in taking up the caregiver's role, as well as developing new skills such as caring for someone else and grocery shopping and cooking. Relationship gains were also evident as participants who were son caregivers shared that they got to spend more time with their parent due to the caregiving. And with siblings, they also had some family discussions to collectively make decisions with regards to caregiving. And lastly, a few participants were actually actively involved in advocacy work to increase awareness for people with dementia and caregivers. So they conducted training, shared experiences with fellow dementia caregivers, and perhaps it also led them to agree to participate in our research interviews because they wanted to share about these caregiving experiences and raise awareness for dementia. So in the next slide, we will just quickly look at some quotes with regards to these positive aspects of caregiving. Yeah, so I hope these stories inspire caregivers who are listening in to our seminar today in one way or another.
Thanks, Ivana. There is also one review that we found that consolidated some findings on the positive aspects of caregiving. So these are personal growth in terms of mastering the caregiving task and becoming more patient, relationship gains, and higher level gains. So I think I would say the findings are quite aligned with ours. So finally, on this note, Clarissa, besides just helping them to cope with caregiving, are there things that we can do to help them turn this caregiving experience into something more positive, perhaps an opportunity for growth?
Yeah, thanks for the question, Wei Lu. I think our role as CRES workers or social workers is not only to help caregivers to cope, but to really empower them to see the journey as a growth opportunity, as you've mentioned. So on this note, I think I would also like to echo the findings shared by Ivana. As the 3 areas of growth, personal growth, relationship gains, and advocacy work, they are something that we personally do witness in the caregivers that we serve and something that we actively try to support them in. So during our interactions with caregivers, we encourage them to reflect on what they feel are their greatest strengths and how they can utilize it, as well as to identify any strengths that they would like to work on. And at first, caregivers might find it a little bit challenging to recognize their personal strengths since most of their focus had always been on their loved ones and not themselves. But by discovering their personal strengths and understanding their internal resources, caregivers can actually feel more confident and competent in their role as a caregiver and are also able to utilize these resources to address any obstacles in their journey. And next, with the goal of relational gains, I think social workers can also provide education on effective communication. So by improving the communication skills through the use of clear and simple language, through non-verbal cues, physical contact, and active listening, I think there can be more successful and positive interactions which can lead to lesser frustrations from both ends. And this will help to facilitate greater feelings of connection and deeper and stronger bonds over time. And lastly, we also try to empower caregivers to step up to peer lead during discussions and sharing sessions with other caregivers. We believe that experienced caregivers hold on to this wealth of knowledge and expertise that workers such as myself might not know of unless we have personal experiences with caregiving. So during one of our sharing sessions, we had a caregiver share a piece of valuable advice of getting hearing aids for their loved ones with dementia, with any hearing issues, as their own experience with their mom saw that the mom's condition deteriorated much more quickly when they did not give her hearing aids. And these very specific and very valuable tips are actually things that might not be covered, in general trainings for caregivers. And this further exemplifies the importance of advocacy work by past or present caregivers, and also the wealth of knowledge that they can provide.
Thanks, Clarissa. So far we have discussed our findings in terms of whether there is anything unique about men as caregivers, the caregiving journey and all its different phases and stress and coping, and positive outcomes of caregiving. With that, we have come to the end of sharing. I'm so sorry we overrun the time, but thank you for listening to us patiently. And I shall now hand over the time to Zhihan and Prof. Liu. Thank you.
Thank you, Wei Long and team, for your presentation. So just to quickly answer some questions, the presenters have kindly agreed to share their slides, so I will send them follow-up email after the webinar. So now I hand over the time for Q&A to Dr. Liu. There are already many questions on Pigeonhole, so I think we will go with Pigeonhole first, and then if anyone would like to speak and ask their questions directly, if there's extra time, we can do so maybe towards the end of the Q&A. Thank you.
Hi, thanks for the very nice presentation and the good work in this area. And I'm glad to see there's so much of interest among the audience. So maybe I can start off on my end first. We'll probably focus on some methods, things that you have done in your qualitative study. Then we'll go into more practical. I also see quite a number of practical questions. Very quickly, you didn't talk about how you recruit your 30 participants, right? I wonder how you can run through briefly what is your approach you use, and whether you have you took any precaution or any actions to make sure you cover a wider range male caregivers to get a bigger picture rather than, for example, only the selected type of, like what you mentioned about. Yeah. Maybe anybody.
Thanks, Prof.
Yeah.
Thanks, Prof, for the question. Yeah, so initially what we did was we got our colleagues from CREST to sort of provide us with some information on their male caregivers that they're supporting back then. And we break them down into some of the profiles. So we break them down into whether they are son caregiver or whether they are a spousal caregiver. We break them down into the severity of the dementia. We break them down into also whether they are staying with their care recipients or not. So these different interlocking factors. And we try to recruit a certain number of participants in each cell. But in reality, it was more challenging than that. So we couldn't really recruit the perfect number of participants from each cell. So it was the profile of the participants recruited was a bit different from the distribution that we originally wanted to cover. In terms of recruitment, we reached out to our own CMH services for clients. We also reached out to a lot of other organizations that we saw in one of the acknowledgement slides just now to recruit clients, and also try and reach out to our own personal contacts for clients. So these are the few ways that we try to recruit the participants. So yes, we try to cover a variation of different profiles, but then in reality, it may not be as smooth sailing as we wanted it to be. Yeah, thanks.
Okay, thank you. Also, along that line, right, while you mentioned about some of the key characteristics you look out for, right, there are a few other ones which are also important. I think the audience also brought up, and something that I have questioned about. So one of them is whether the person, the respondent is actually a primary or not a primary caregiver. That will probably has an impact, isn't it? Then the other one will be whether the person is still working and whether there's a juggling between the ongoing work and the caregiving role. These are practical things. And then I think the audience also brought up another one, were marital status, and whether you look into that and whether marital status actually has any effect. I suppose the marital status is probably more relevant to children caregivers, whether you are married or you are actually single when you're providing care for your parents. Yeah, any thoughts along this line about the demographics?
Thanks, Bob. I'll leave Ivana to answer about how it affected their work. But the question about the primary caregiver, it's a very, very good question, very important question, because Ivana and I discussed it over and over again so many times. Who really is the primary caregiver? Is it the person making the decision or the helper who is taking care of the care recipient day in, day out? Who is the primary caregiver? So we were discussing this over and over again. And then we came to the realization that, is there really a need to identify a primary caregiver? I mean, these are our questions that we ask ourselves, because both of them are actually taking different parts of the caregiving, which are equally important, the decision-making and the instrumental aspect of caregiving. So is there a need to identify who is the primary caregiver? Of course, I think from a SSA point of view, it's important to identify a single point of contact. So that facilitates the communication. But in terms of the entire caregiving, so we're asking ourselves this question now, is there a need to identify a primary caregiver? That leads us to another question, because we see in this whole research that caregiving actually involves multiple caregivers. And if caregiving involves multiple caregivers, how should we then be studying caregiving? Because predominantly when we study caregiving, we usually look at it from a single individual caregiver. So when we study caregiving, we study the caregiver. But I think this research shows us that actually caregiving is maybe more a system. Caregiving is maybe more systemic. So there are multiple caregivers playing different roles. And because it's systemic, there may be a context to it. The relationship, the previous relationship between the caregiver and the care recipient affects the caregiving relationship now. And because it's a system, there are multiple caregivers, people can sometimes move in and out the system. And the relationship within the subsystem, actually, there's a dynamic that they affect each other. So the caregiving affects the relationship between the caregivers. The relationship between caregivers affects the dynamics of the caregiving. So this question of who is the caregiver actually led us on, Ivana, to a lot of discussion over this. And we were wondering whether moving ahead when we look at research on caregiving, whether we should be looking at it for more caregiving as a system rather than just the individual caregiver. So instead of asking what is stressing this caregiver, we may have to ask what is stressing this system. How is this caregiver coping? We may have to ask how is this system coping. So these are some of our thoughts from that question about primary caregiver. Yeah, Ivana, you want to say something about the work?
Yeah, I just want to add on as well. We always say like it takes a village to raise a child, right? But in this aspect, it takes a village to care for an elderly as well. Yeah, so on that note on work and employment, so from our findings, there were some changes with regards to employment. So a handful of our participants actually stopped work totally to become a caregiver, while some of the others switched to more flexible work. So for example, one of them said that they changed the career trajectory to something more flexible like consultancy work. And another one took on night shift job so as to better cater to caregiving. But of course, I think sometimes in life, things are not so clear-cut. The switch to flexible work may also be simultaneously driven by other reasons. So for example, they might have personal aspirations or even own health issues as well that led them to change their kind of like the work arrangements. And interestingly, I remember one of our participants actually shared that he took up an ad hoc part-time job in addition of full-time employment to supplement income because he hired a helper. So he has a helper helping with the caregiving. Yeah, so it kind of, it seems like the impact of caregiving on work was not that linear. So we usually think that people normally have to make changes and adjustments so that they have more time for caregiving, right? But from our participants, it seems like there may also be cases where people had to work more to bring in income to cover the caregiving expenses. Yeah. Wei-Lun, do you have anything to add on?
I think there was another question on marital status. So for the sons, we do have those who are married and therefore their spouse will also involved in some ways in the caregiving for some of them. And we do have a few who are actually single. Yeah, I don't have the exact number now, but we do have both those who are married and those who are single.
I just want to add on that we also have a friend caregiver who is actually a long-time friend of the persons with dementia. It was because the relationship of the care recipient was not with the son wasn't very close. So this friend actually took up to help in taking his role as a caregiver for this old friend. Yeah.
Okay, probably one more very quick methods related question before we go on to there's lots of questions about the practical side and the implication. So I'm pretty sure the audience will be wondering and want to ask you, right? You keep talking about comparing male and this female and male and how male is being unique and different and in some of your qualitative analysis, right? I'm pretty sure people will be asking, you don't have comparison, right? How do you compare in this case?
Thanks for the question. So yes, we only have male caregivers, so we could only compare with what we found in literature. So yeah, it is not a kind of apple-to-apple kind of comparison. Having said that, there are a few studies that actually make comparisons, and I would say the data is still quite mixed. So there were some studies that found actually not much differences, but there were also other studies that found some differences. Yeah.
Okay, let's go on to some questions from the audience related to, I think there are a lot of burning questions, some of it with 12 votes. All right, I think one of the questions that was asked is, how do you work with, along the same team, how do you work with a male caregiver? Do you need would it be better to have a male caseworker? Any anecdotes to support that maybe the therapeutic alliance will be better? Is there any specific technique you can use to engage male caregivers? And how male caregivers generally respond to emotional support, whether they open up and things along these lines. So on the practical side of now you have a real male caregiver in front of you, how do you approach it? What is the best approach? Is it through male caregiver, a male caseworker? How do you talk to the person? Will the caregiver usually respond well? Yeah.
Okay, maybe I'll take the question.
Right.
I mean, through all the questions, I think the most important thing to remember is that we shouldn't generalize male caregivers as, like this is a male caregiver, so they're going to respond in a certain way. But also to recognize that ultimately at the end of the day, they are individuals with their own preferences. So for example, okay, maybe the first question about having a male caseworker, will it help to create a better therapeutic alliance? I don't have the data to support this, but based on my own experience, I do encounter male caregivers who prefer having male caseworkers because that will make them feel more comfortable with sharing their emotions. But at the same time, I also have male caregivers who actually wouldn't want a male caseworker to be attending to them because they feel like it's very weird for two men to be discussing, emotions and their feelings. So in that sense, having a male caseworker might not necessarily lead to a better therapeutic alliance. I think at the end of the day, there are many factors that contribute to how good a therapeutic alliance is, be it the gender of the caseworker and the client. Besides that, there's also the competency of the worker, their experience, their communication skills. So I think it's a very you must look at it at a more multifaceted way. And on how to engage, how with masculinization of caregiving, how do they open up, and also how to better engage them, right? I think it really depends. For male caregivers who are not very open, for example, at the very beginning, they are not very open to receiving emotional support. I think the most important thing is to respect their individual preference. So if they feel like they don't need it, they don't need emotional support, don't attend to me. I think forcing it on them will only turn them away from formal support services. And I think what we can do instead is to support them in the practical aspects continually. So hopefully this builds a better rapport over time. And by letting them know that you're always providing a safe space and a non-judgmental space for them to share their emotions when they're ready, right? Hopefully over time they might be more receptive to opening up and sharing about their emotions. And I think another thing that is very important would be to emphasize that seeking emotional support is not a sign of weakness, but rather a proactive step towards maintaining emotional well-being. So actually that might not be very easy to do for some people, and that's something that might require a lot of courage. And when we challenge the stereotype and assumptions about men seeking help, I think we also hope to have the caregivers to be more open. And another thing we can do is also use relatable examples of other male caregivers who have sought emotional support and actually benefited from it. So I think this can be a very powerful way to encourage them to be more receptive. So for example, sharing stories of male caregivers who have found comfort in support groups or counseling. And all these will help to normalize the idea of seeking emotional support and hopefully, getting them to open up to workers emotionally also.
Okay, let's move on. We got quite a number of questions, very short of time actually. We just focus on the common ones that people wanted to ask. I think one of the question here is with 9 votes, given the traditional masculinity bestowed upon males, how should care workers work on deconstructing this stereotype masculinity concept with male caregivers so that they can embrace caregiving? Yeah, it's a very big question. And I wonder also, adding on to that, right, whether any of your findings today would help also to guide your answer along that.
I think in terms of the findings, please feel free to add on, Prof. Tang and Ivana and Clarissa. We do see a mix of the younger ones, the sons caregiver. I think they are actually more open to embracing their caregiving and maybe less inclined to adopt a more so what we term just now the masculinization of the caregiving. So actually they talked about how they attend support group and how it was helpful for them. they talked about the different ways in which they are able to actually share their emotions. So I think like what Clarissa has mentioned, maybe the more senior ones because of their growing ups and things like that. So those are the group which may have to maybe work a bit more. And also in terms of being task-oriented, being more relational, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Ivana, it's also the younger ones who are actually more able to relate to their care recipient in a more relational manner, right? So in terms of keeping them company and in terms of relating to them. Yeah. So anything else to add, Ivana?
Yeah, I think like maybe it's our sense, like we didn't collect any data, but it might be like education level as well. Yeah, so some of the younger caregivers, they did share that they attended support groups and they found it beneficial. Yeah, and yeah, I just wanted to share one anecdote as well. I think there was it was actually one of the oldest participants. So after the interview, we got to know that after talking to us, because the participant was actually reluctant to hire any form of helpers before that. But after having the interview with us, it was because that participant was through a personal contact. So after the interview, he was actually a bit more open to hiring a part-time helper. Yeah, so I think going back to the point about masculinization of caregiving, perhaps having conversations like this, talking about it, like asking them to share their experience, do help to a certain extent in terms of them opening up more about, like, you know, what they're experiencing. And yeah, like it's a small baby step, but it's one step towards being more open in their emotions. Yeah.
Sorry, can I also, thanks, Ivan. Can I also add that I think it's very important that we don't stereotype. So we are not saying that all men are task focused all the time. We're also not saying that all women are emotionally focused all the time. I think as Clarissa has mentioned, but also because Clarissa has mentioned that in her practice, she did come across some who are more like that. And in our literature review, we also have a few studies who also have who also found some of this masculinization. So of men being more task-oriented and more problem-solving. So there is probably a certain level of truth to it, right? But I think we should not stereotype, because Clarissa also mentioned that in her work with caregivers, there actually are not a lot of difference in providing services because the needs overlaps, there are shared needs. But Clarissa also mentioned, I think more importantly, that it's important for us to try to de-stereotype. Don't know whether there's this one, to de-stereotype and to normalize male caregiving. So Clarissa, you have anything else to add? Yeah.
I don't think I have much to add, but I think what I mentioned earlier to answer the previous question also is very applicable to this question that we're answering. And at the end of the day, I think the best way to deconstruct this stereotype is to really address it head on. Speak to the caregiver about what their concerns are, with regards to seeking help. Do they feel like, they might appear weak, or do they feel embarrassed by it? And how can we normalize it such that, they don't feel those negative feelings anymore? So for example, sharing more with them about other male caregivers, or just having conversations, letting them have conversations through, for example, public education, just letting conversations take place in the community so that they can encounter more similar people going through similar situations as them.
Okay, I think we are really short of time. Maybe one last one to summarize, right? I'm pretty sure there are caregivers among us who are tuning in here. If you can just briefly talk about what are the services available for the caregivers in general, and specifically for male caregivers, especially those who tune in with this interest. And is there anything that CRES Commit you are doing along this line? And what are the help available in the community? I think that would be a very good close for all of us here.
Yeah, Thanks for the question. I think, truth be told, there are not many services that specifically target male caregivers. And that is something that I think we have also identified through working on this sharing and this research. I think reason being, okay, I might not know the exact reason, but when we do, for example, have trainings or support groups, I think a general issue that we face is having sufficient people attend such that we can carry out the support group sessions. But caregivers, many times they are wearing a lot of many different hats, they are juggling a lot of responsibilities, so having them commit to an entire session of caregiver support group, for example, might not be very practical. So if we narrow this down further to only male caregivers, that might further reduce the chances of having or getting enough registrants to come on board. But that said, I think it's also very important for us to, recognizing this, start to look into the demand for it. Maybe there is actually a demand for it, just that there aren't many services out there. So I think that's something that service providers can also look into moving forward.
Okay, with that note, I will just summarize and say that looks like there are services around for caregivers, but not so much specific to the male caregivers. I think this is really an area of need that we can work on, and really looking at the Asian culture where there's this stereotype with male and all that. I think if we really can improve on that end, we really can untap a large group of caregivers in future. I mean, rather than if it's a female patient, a female care recipient, and then the husband will just, for example, just sent to a nursing home and things like that. I think this is an area of need that we can really look into, and I congratulate the team for doing such a good work and applaud you for the nice findings as well. And I think with that, I'll hand over to Zhihan probably for the closing.
Thank you so much, Dr. Liu and Wei Lun, Ivana, Clarissa, and Prof. Tang for sharing your research at our platform today. So I'll quickly launch a quick poll for the audience. Please let us know what you think of today's webinar. And let me quickly share screen. Yeah, so just a very quick wrap up. Thank you for everyone for joining us today. And this is just an outline of the upcoming seminars for the next few months. And yeah, if you're not on our mailing list, do scan the QR code on the screen to join and receive regular updates, not just on our seminars, but also other functions like workshops and our snippet publications. So thank you everyone again for joining us today. I'll just leave this slide on the screen for a few minutes before I close the session. So please feel free to leave if you have to rush off. Yeah, so for the presenters, thank you so much for your time. I will collate the pigeonhole questions and send a follow-up email by tomorrow or Friday. Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you, Zhihan. Thank you, Prof. Liu. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.